We're going to start on the second assignment. I've actually decided we'll go into talking about Alzheimer's disease next because it follows nicely in terms of what we just talked about in cognitive neuroscience. Of course, in the field of cognitive neuroscience, that's a basic research field where you try to find out what's going on inside the brain that allows us to learn and remember things. The field of Alzheimer's disease wouldn't really be considered a field of cognitive neuroscience, except in the sense that Alzheimer's disease affects, obviously, memory and personality and has some very strong neurobiological roots. So there are overlaps between the field, but the field of Alzheimer's disease is dominated by medical research, if you will, medical psychological research. And so what you're going to get in this particular module is a situation. I've been doing talks actually nationally on Alzheimer's disease for about 10 years. And so that's kind of good news and bad news. The good news is I'm going to try to teach you a lot about Alzheimer's disease in terms of the neuroscience. I know a great deal about the brain and the biology and treatments, and I do these talks nationally in many places. The bad news is that I know a fair amount of information. I have tried to water this down a little bit for you, but this is physiological psychology, so we're not going to focus on all the psychological and clinical diagnostic type things. This is a physiological psychology class, so we're going to try to get at the heart of what's going on inside the brain and treatments and cures and so forth. And so whenever I do these presentations, I do like to start with a little bit of psychology. So let me kind of share this with you. The basic question that I often ask at the start of my presentations is, if you had to choose a disease you would least want to have, would you choose, and this is on the outline there, asthma, depression, or Alzheimer's disease? And when I ask that question, asthma, depression, or Alzheimer's disease, most people comment back, well, the one I would least want to have of that group is Alzheimer's disease. And then I say, well, why is that? Well, if you think about it, Alzheimer's disease kind of has some different problems associated with it compared to these other ones. With these other diseases, asthma and depression, are there medications that we can use to treat these diseases? Yes, we can treat asthma with quite a few different medications that can help people like me. Depression, there are a lot of medications that can help treat people with depression as well. With Alzheimer's disease, the medications are really in their infancy. We haven't really developed a lot of good treatments yet, so it's really at the start of this. So that's one difference between the three. A second difference, morbidity versus mortality. Which one is going to be causing more in the ways of morbidity problems and which one more in mortality? Well, hopefully you said that asthma and depression usually are more related to morbidity issues. Quality of life is wrecked. You can have problems with everyday life, but you're not looking at having death events in most situations. Certainly there are exceptions to that, but generally speaking, we're talking about morbidity issues. Alzheimer's is terminal. You're going to die of Alzheimer's disease, and so you're going to have to confront mortality issues. So certainly in that respect, it's worse. And probably a couple of other reasons as well. How is our society in general, is it any good at handling the idea of confronting our own mortality? I would argue that, in fact, not really. Western culture doesn't deal with the idea of coping with one's own mortality particularly well, so this is quite troubling to people. And then obviously, and maybe the final group of reasons, if you were to ask people what things define who you are as a person, most people would argue that your memory and your personality are the things that really define you. And when you get Alzheimer's disease, you're going to lose your memory and you're going to lose your personality. And so in some ways, this disease is very tragic. It's going to cost the family lots of time, lots of money, lots of caregiving. And there's going to be a lot of psychological and financial changes that go on within the family. So Alzheimer's disease is really a problem, obviously mostly affecting the elderly. About the only real good news I can tell you about this, and this is back in Roman numeral 1 of the outline, is there are organizations out there trying to do something. The most important of those organizations is the Alzheimer's Association, which is a group of places around the country, including here in Virginia, which try to provide services and help to people affected by Alzheimer's disease. They run a lot of support groups, and they try to help people out. The other thing that's very useful is the federal government is very concerned about Alzheimer's disease. So they actually fund, through the National Institute of Science, 27 different research centers around the country. And these research centers do all sorts of clinical trials and research studies on things like the psychology of Alzheimer's, coping with it, and the things we're going to talk about, the neurobiology. So there are a lot of research centers doing a lot of research on this, and we are coming up with some answers, but progress is slow. So this is general information about Alzheimer's disease that I'll ask you to put in your outline. So we'll close this part of the presentation off now.